Hi, welcome to our sixth study in the Epistle to the Colossians, Christ, the image of the invisible God. We have taken a little extra time because some of this material is, I say slow going, but it's so good just to look at three verses and just woodshed that down and talk about how good it is that the cross has been provided for us. And with this being Easter, the week before Easter, why it's just it enhances the experience of study as we've taken a deep dive into the things of God regarding the cross. We learned that the cross is more than just atonement, although atonement is fantastic, a huge thing. It's more. The cross is more than just forgiveness. The cross is Jesus taking that IOU that we owe God for sin and tearing it, saying, "You don't owe me. Jesus paid it all." And then that's the IOU, the legal certificate of indebtedness, as it's called in Colossians chapter 2. So, and why did Paul write Colossians? I think it's becoming clear after we'll finish two chapters after tonight. It's clear that he was teaching one main thing, and that was Christ is sufficient. It's enough to have Jesus. You don't need any more, because if you have him, you have everything. That if you trust and love him and obey him, that you are a child of God, atoned for, and the IOU, that debt you owed of sin, is gone. Not a wonderful thought? And that's really where we are right now. We're in Colossians 2 and verse 16. I'm going to finish the chapter. Colossians 2, verse 16, and I'll finish the chapter through verse 23. Therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. Do not let anyone who delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you. Such a person also goes into great detail about what they've seen. They are puffed up with idle notions by their unspiritual mind. They have lost connection with the head, from whom the whole body, supported and held together by its ligaments and sinews, grows as God causes it to grow. And since you died with Christ to the elemental spiritual forces of the world, why, as though you still belong to the world, do you submit to its rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These rules, which have to do with things that are all destined to perish with use, are based on merely human commands and teachings. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom, with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. Paul begins to uncover the identity of those who have been teaching falsely in the Colossian fellowship. These troublemakers have basically done one thing. As I said just a moment ago, the purpose for Paul writing Colossians is to tell these folks, hey, Jesus is sufficient, he's enough. The troublemakers were teaching, hey, you have to keep a lot of rules. I mean, it's not just about trusting and obeying Jesus. It's about keeping these esoteric, complicated rules that show your devotion. You know, you're fasting, you're being rigorous about your fasting and about your behavior. The rituals and mystical elements of worship, the worship of angels is even advocated by these false teachers. And Paul just says, hey, all we need is Jesus. He's it. So the keys to understanding who these false teachers are in Colossae are on a couple of different aspects. One thing that I noticed that is true about these false teachers, and by the way, we're not exactly sure all of what these guys believe, or ladies. We don't know who these people are. We have a notion that there's some Judaism in there, maybe, but not everything. You know, it talks about Sabbath observance. But what about new moons? And that has maybe some Jewish background, but that almost sounds pagan. So there's a thought that maybe it's kind of a mix of paganism and Judaism that's beginning to kind of a mystical quality that it's getting into the Christian religion, and you have to know certain things and do certain things. You have to fast a lot. You have to rigorously treat your body. And so that's really what this is all about, although we don't know the exact identity. It's interesting, except for the Sabbath day, Paul talked about observance of days being part of this false humility. He said there's only really one day that's ever been commanded by God directly to be observed, and that's the Sabbath day in the Ten Commandments. It's interesting, our Sabbatarian friends, our folks who worship on Saturday, will say, yes, you got that right. The only thing is, here in Colossians chapter 2, it says, hey, don't let anybody disqualify you or judge you because you don't worship on a Sabbath or you do. Don't even get involved in the issue. Why? Because it's not about Jesus. It's not about Jesus. And about this fasting, while all can be helpful, what about it? Is it about Jesus? Probably not. It's probably about showing how superior you are spiritually, So those who, interestingly, those who argue dogmatically that Sunday is commanded as a day of worship of Christians, you can't find a direct commandment about worshiping on Sunday. You find examples of the early church meeting on Sunday. Pentecost was on Sunday. There are some significant, Jesus' resurrection was on Sunday, but nowhere did Jesus or any of the apostles ever write or teach that you had to meet on Sunday. Where we know that the early church did, because in Acts 20, verse 7, they did. It was probably a Saturday night, which would have been a Sunday morning for the Jews, but Acts 27. And then they met in 1 Corinthians 16 on the first day of the week. And Paul said, you need to take up your collections then on the first day of the week so that I won't have to have a special assembly when I come to gather up money to do good to the saints in Jerusalem who are very poor. So you have evidence that the Christians were meeting on Sunday, but you don't have a direct command to worship on Sunday. But through the years, it has evolved into a command because of certain things. The resurrection's on Sunday, Pentecost was on Sunday, and you can go right down the list. Here, he says, don't let anybody judge you about that, about whether you observe the Sabbath or not. The surefire way to tell a false teacher from someone who is true, in fact, is the arrogance, the pridefulness, the attitude of the person who is teaching. Some teachers are humble and compassionate. Most true teachers are. They realize they don't know everything, and they strive to learn, and they keep on learning, but they're humble enough to admit, hey, I could be wrong about this. Then there are others who believe they're the smartest folks in the room. These who believed they were better than everyone else and who looked down their long, bony noses at people who didn't observe Christianity as they did, complete with all the mystical fasting and rituals and Sabbath observances and non-observances, all that stuff that they threw into the mix of religion. He says those folks are just, they just think they're better. They just think they're right. And then he says they have visions. They have visions, but it's only because of their unspiritual minds. They do spiritual things, but they have an unspiritual mind. Interesting. Is it possible that those who talk the most about their spirituality are in fact unspiritual? Are the spiritually minded more private about their spiritual maturity? Very well could be. If you read that passage again in the latter part of Colossians 2, those that speak the most about their spiritual growth and accomplishments might be the least humble among us. So then Paul says in verse 10, he says that, or verse 20, that if we died with Christ to the physical world with all of its power and awesome force like the stars, it's thought maybe that Paul was talking about some that were worshiping the elements of the world, that was astrology perhaps. Why would we listen to those who would instruct on the very things that we have died to? These are things we've died to. These earthly things we don't pay attention to. Eating and drinking, for instance, what you eat and what you drink, and these so-called holy men and women were fasting and denying themselves physical comforts in order to punish their physical bodies, to show their devotion to God. Um, these were just merely human commands. And in fact, although they look pretty good, they don't do anything in contributing to a person's spirituality. Prohibiting lots of things to be able to show off that you can live without a lot of things. Look what I'm depriving myself of. It's not spirituality. It's pride. It's boasting. And he says, it just doesn't do anything to improve your spiritual life. And then he tells you how to do this. How do you improve your spiritual life? Well, we go to chapter 3, and we're going to just read the first 4 verses because of time, because I think this kind of wraps up the idea. He says, all these false teachers out here are boasting of their goodness and how spiritual they are. And how do you grow spiritually? And here's what he tells you. Chapter 3, verse 1. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. If you're following Jesus and Jesus is sufficient, that means Jesus is your life. You already have him. He already is your life. One of the things I really appreciate about Alcoholics Anonymous, of course, they have their steps. And one of those steps is to admit that you can't do it by yourself, that you have to have a higher power to help you. And of course, I know who the higher power is. They're trying to reach people. But one of the things that you have to make amends, that's one thing that you do, and you ask for forgiveness from people that you have wronged. But the great thing about AA is, instead of telling you to just stop drinking, as if that's enough to just say, stop drinking, and then you'll stop, it tells you what to do. If you remember, Jesus told a parable, and this was in Luke chapter 11, verse 24. He told this story about an unclean spirit that was cast out of a human, out of a body. And it says it went through desert places and had nowhere to find rest. But then it went back to the human that it was occupying before. And in that human's body, everything was set in order. It says everything was clean and set in order. In other words, it had been vacuumed of all the bad stuff. And there was this human being who was now free of the demon and clean, but he hadn't furnished his body with things that were good. And so it says that evil spirit took 7 more evil spirits back with him, and they took up residence, so that the person's situation was worse after the exorcism than before. The idea being, you can clean all the bad stuff out of your life, but you better be careful, because if you don't replace it with good things, you're just spinning your wheels. In fact, you may be making things actually worse for yourself. Paul says that holiness comes from looking to Jesus and keeping your mind on things above. That would mean doing good. It would mean giving in to the virtues, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, long-suffering, self-control, all those things that make up the Christian's life. We'll spend the rest of our lives adding these things to our lives, so that when we clean the bad out, we are simultaneously cultivating the good. We're furnishing our house with all the good things. Holiness is not about complicated rules and regulations and deciding who's in and who's out. That's not holiness. Faith is not observing rules. No matter how impressive the rules may look, no matter how biblically sound they sound, you say, well, I worship right. That shows my devotion. I don't do this in worship, or I don't do that in my life. We don't learn not to hate. What we do is we learn to love. That's the good. We don't purge our mouths of cursing. We say, well, I'm going to really try not to curse. Try this. Fill your mouth with blessing and thanksgiving so that you're furnishing good things in the place of the things that you're not doing anymore. Instead of complaining about things. I say, I'm going to stop complaining. Well, then instead of complaining, fill your life with thanksgiving. Audibly say what you're thankful for. I've been seeing that more myself lately. People kind of say it in an offhanded way, like they'll say, well, prices are going up, but at least I don't have bombs falling on my head like they do in Ukraine. Well, that's not really that cynical if you take it seriously. That's not cynical at all. That's a great blessing. A dirty kitchen indicates that we have food to eat when there are many in the world that do not have as much as we do. It's not about fasting on certain days, depriving ourselves of food, but it's in sharing our means with others. It's not about just attending worship services so as to somehow please God by our attendance. It's about being and fellowshipping and making friends with God's people and we're all struggling. Christ attitudes is what we're working for. C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, said this. He said, one of the marks of a certain type of bad man is that he cannot give up a thing himself with wanting everyone else to give it up. He said that's not the Christian way. An individual Christian may see fit to give up all sorts of things for special reasons. Marriage, or meat, or beer, or the cinema. But the moment he starts looking down his nose at other people who don't use them, he has taken the wrong turn. And that was really a problem for these early false teachers. They had said, we're going without this, we're going without that, and if you don't, you're not as spiritual as we are. Let me say this in closing. There are a great many things that may trigger us into thinking someone is not as dedicated to Christ as they ought to be, or that they should know more Scripture or have more knowledge than they have. Their hair might be a bit too long. They may eat meat, or they may be vegetarians. They may worship with a piano in their worship, and others may not. Some will drink communion from one cup, others will drink communion from many cups. Some believe that once God chooses you, you can't unchoose, that you have no choice about your salvation. Others believe you have a choice. Tell me, what do these things have to do with Christ and the life he lived, the example he set, and the atonement he provided? What does any of that have to do with that? Will that build us in the fruit of the Spirit? Will that provide any of the stepping stones that Peter talks about? Add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge. Where does this all come? How is this helpful to us? Well, we should do a serious inventory about the things that really do help us and the things that are really just man-made rules, traditions, interpretations. Think carefully about those things that we assume are true also. Be careful. Remember about assumptions. But you may have written off someone that you don't think is as devoted or as well-read as they should be, meaning as devoted as we are. That person has a Lord and Master, and it's not us. They will give an answer to their Lord and Master, and to be sure, we certainly will. And one day, I'm sure we will be surprised at the people we see in the new heavens and new earth, and surprised perhaps at those who are not there. Walk your walk with Jesus. He is your life. We'll see you next time as we pick up in Colossians 3.